Hello, and everything you're doing is bad. I want you to know this. Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I'm joined as always by my co-ghost, Andrew Williams. How we doing today, Andrew?
You know, it's all good.
I'm sad that's my last time I get to say co-ghost, and I go back to trying to come up with more clever stuff for every intro to every podcast, but it was a good run. We reached the last movie in our Ghost month. But Andrew, before we jump into it, I just want to... I don't think I've really talked to you much since you did something very cool. You went to the movies. And you saw a movie
all the time.
I know, but I'm very jealous of this experience. You saw The Fall in theaters, and not just in theaters. I've seen that movie in theaters before, but this was several years back, and now there's a new 4K scan doing a limited theatrical run before it hits streaming, and I'm heard rumors as a physical release. So how was that experience, Andrew?
It was interesting. I had clearly never seen it before because I don't know if we talked about this on air, because I feel like if I had, I would have remembered it.
It's a very memorable movie, if nothing else.
So, I went with a friend who had also seen it before. She was pretty excited to watch it. She was the one that actually reached out to me and was like, "Hey, we're gonna go watch this. Do you want to come with?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Not just seeing it in theaters, but seeing it with people who I know are fans of it. It is a trip. Like, I went in knowing like a little bit of the story. Like I obviously knew it was super praised for like these visuals. I knew it was praised for kind of the locations that it's shot in and the vivid colors and the use of imagery. And I knew there was this like setup of some kind of like the hospital. And I didn't really know anything else about it. I really didn't have any idea how it was going to go. I knew Lee Pace was in it, but that was it. And so watching it was an experience as it like devolves into this, fantasy story, but I wasn't quite prepared for like the dark undertone that's kind of running through the whole thing.
Yes.
So, so like the movie takes a lot of turns, but it is very striking, and I am very, very glad that I got to see it on the big screen. I liked it a lot. Don't quite like, it's one of those ones where like I would probably watch it again to like appreciate more of the visuals, but I don't know how often it's a movie I would revisit just because of that kind of dark story that's kind of boiling underneath it for so much of it.
Yeah, it can be a little heavy. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't have an official rank, but it's probably top 10. And I mean,
ranking things is something you do when you're in your 20s. It's not, don't do that anymore.
The 20s it's like number 1 for decades that you rank stuff. Number 2 is probably your teens, and the third age group for ranking is probably the 30s, where I am now. So
I'm not acknowledging your jokes, we're moving forward.
Did you not get it, Andrew? I can explain it. As I was making a ranking to talk about how we don't... Andrew's melting as I do this. Okay, so The Fall, one of my favorite movies, and I clearly love it, and I say this lovingly. I don't think it's perfect by any means. I think there's some, maybe, I don't know, pacing issues. The story can be kind of... it's not perfect. That's all I want to say. But it's still one of my favorite movies, and still one of my number one recommendations, because the visuals are incredible, and there's truly... I've never seen another movie like it. I just haven't. It's just so unique that I feel like you just have to see it. And if you can see it in theaters, that's the best way to do it. It was made, I think, this is off the top of my dome. I haven't read about it in a while. I think it was made over like a 4-year period.
Yeah.
And Tarsem, the director, would co-finance most of it. He would literally just take a commercial shooting job in an exotic location somewhere in the world, use that money to fly the cast and crew out, shoot some scenes, put them in the can, and then film another scene whenever he could. It's literally shot all over the world, striking visuals, and I've also read there's no computer effects in the movie, which is wild with some of the visuals and some of like the transitions where like someone's face becomes like the rocks of the next landscape as it. I don't know how they pull it off, but that's what I've heard. There's like no computers involved, or maybe very little. Because I've heard the same thing about Eternal Sunshine, and I watched that movie, and I'm like, how is that not CGI right there? Anyway, it's incredible. Looks awesome. Yeah, I guess you should say like, because I took friend of the show, my wife, to see it years back in theaters. I was like, you got to see this movie. I love it. You're gonna love it. And I just talked about the visuals, and then you watch it, and there's this dark story elements, as you mentioned, and friend of the show is crying along with the little girl in the movie, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess I kind of forgot that there's some heavy themes at work here. So I guess fair warning, so that you know exactly what you're getting into. But still, yeah, huge recommendation. Very jealous of your experience seeing the 4K. I will try to get out in theaters, if nothing else. Hopefully Mubi, who is responsible for this 4K, and obviously they're a streaming service, hopefully they release it on 4K physically, and I'll at least get it there.
I've gotten a physical 4K release from Mubi of something before. So, and that was what was that? It was Decision to Leave, which was Park Chan-wook's latest, the guy who did Old Boy and Lady Vengeance and the whole Vengeance trilogy. They did his new one in a 4K release as well. So I would hope that this feels like something that's just like a visual masterpiece. It feels like there's no way you can't do a 4K release of that. And I think they've said there's an intention, but they wanted to let it run through theaters and run on the streaming service first.
Yeah,
and
makes
then
sense.
So if you're interested in watching it, I would recommend doing Mubi for a month, because then what you can do is you can watch The Fall, and then you can also watch The Substance, starring Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley.
Is that already on Mubi? Because that's still in theaters as well.
I think they said Halloween, The Substance is going to be on Mubi, so it may not be there yet, but also if you can see The Substance in theaters, you should also do that, because that movie is also awesome and goes way harder than I ever expected it to in the third act. So
I've heard good things. I would like to check it out. I would like to physically own these things. We champion this all the time. Physical media, owning your stuff. But if streaming is the way you have to go, so be it. I'll do it.
I'm more speaking on like just being able to watch it, but I obviously just, the idea of being able to own them is obviously important. I literally have like, I'm going to point my camera this way for you, Chris, so you can see literally all this stuff I have sitting on my desk.
It is a very tall tower of, I'm going to assume, still shrink-wrapped movies that have arrived in the mail in the past.
Shut up.
2 weeks, Andrew? 1 month? How long is that backlog?
Stop speaking.
Okay.
Stop speaking.
You showed me. What am I supposed to do? Not tell the people what I can see?
You don't tell them it's all still shrink wrapped.
Andrew, we are not talking about our movie collections today. We're talking about one very specific movie. A movie that I know is in your collection. I would reason to bet multiple times right now. But every week, we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Ghost Month, and this week we are talking the 1989 film Ghostbusters II. Now, Andrew, I ask you the same question every week. I want to know your history with the movie. It feels a little silly to ask you that now, because you're the biggest Ghostbusters fan that I know. So it seems silly to be like, hey, have you seen this one before? Do you watch it often? Although I am a little curious how often you revisit it, giving it a sort of complicated place in the franchise as far as the fans are concerned. But Andrew, history with Ghostbusters 2. What do you got for me?
I've definitely watched it a lot. I don't think I saw it in theaters. I would have been coming up on 2 years old when this came out, so I don't know that my parents were taking me to see Ghostbusters. I mean, we've talked Ghostbusters before. I mean, we talked about it in Ghostbusters 16. We've talked about it before, but I I am not the biggest Ghostbusters fan. I probably know, but I am the biggest Ghostbusters fan. Lots of other people know.
Okay.
I know some people that are very deep in the weeds.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm not trying to go in
you actually can't. You actually can't ask me a question.
Go on. No, go on.
No, anyway.
I don't want to do a huge tangent on this. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
You say you're not the biggest Ghostbusters fan, Right. If you know someone, this is a hypothetical person, that is diehard Ghostbusters. They love it. They got merchandise. Maybe they have a tattoo. They love Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
But they hate 16 and act like it's not part of the franchise. Would you consider that person a bigger Ghostbusters fan than you?
Yes, because I, more than anyone, have no issue saying that fandoms are the best and worst part of anything. Okay. I would say he is a fan of a certain type of Ghostbusters.
It's weird how you assume this hypothetical person was a male, Andrew.
Call it a hunch. Them, sorry. They, them. No, I've asked myself that. I say that a lot because, and I've had that same kind of conversation. It's like, are you really a fan if you didn't? Because the thing is like, I don't want to say you're not a fan if you don't enjoy Ghostbusters 16, because enjoyment of one part of a franchise is not required. Like, I like Batman, but there are Batman media projects that I do not care for. I think that if your response to Ghostbusters 16 was to harass the cast and crew, to harass the studio, and to demand your fan whims be acknowledged, which eventually they were with Ghostbusters Afterlife, I don't think you're a fan at that point, because I don't know what it is you're a fan of. Because if you're a bully and harassing people, then you've lost the sauce. Now, a lot of people that say they don't like 16 will insist that all they did was dislike the movie, and they got called sexist and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. They still say this, and there's giant circles that still believe it. They will point to these emails by Amy Pascal or whatever. And I'm like, I don't need to look at emails from Amy Pascal to know that I saw it.
To see what's going on. Yeah.
I watched it. So, yes, I would say, and to be fair, I know lots of Ghostbusters fans who do enjoy Ghostbusters 16. They see it as its own thing, which is what they always should have seen it as. And some of those people, I would say, are still bigger fans than me. There are fans who have whole rooms of Ghostbuster stuff. And I have part of a closet and part of a closet at my parents' house. So
can we do a quick gauge for listeners that maybe don't know how deep you are in this? Like, you have a Ghostbusters costume, which can mean many things, but you have a quality Ghostbusters costume, which I think is an important distinction. Now, I can't speak in a very intelligent way as far as, I don't even know what all the stuff is called besides the word pack, but you have very nice looking replica.
I do. And that's kind of what I mean when I say there's bigger fans than me, because for the longest time, the only way to get a lot of this gear was to build it yourself. A high quality movie prop replica of this stuff for the longest time did not exist. So I remember online, there was this guy, I think his name was Norm Gagnon, put out these plans, and it was how to build your own proton pack. And it was literally like stuff at the hardware store. And it was literally like, go buy all of this stuff. And it included like measurements, and it included like templates to cut things. And it was literally like, for like $200-300 worth of materials at a hardware store, and then a ton of work, you could build a proton pack that looked pretty okay. So I never went that hard. The only thing I ever built was the goggles they wear sometimes. I bought like a welding mask at Lowe's, and then got some pipe pieces to make the lenses, and it worked, and it looks fine. Nobody cared. Which is the biggest thing about Ghostbuster props. As long as it's in the ballpark, nobody cares.
You get the idea.
So about 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, Mattel had the license and actually did a bunch of life-size movie props, like the Ghost Trap, which is the one I took to the aforementioned Halloween party that we met at. They did a PKE meter. They actually did do a set of goggles as well that I didn't buy. But so I had those for the longest time. And then they also did The wand is what it's called. It's not a gun, it's a wand. It's
I did not know that.
It's the gunnest looking wand I've ever seen. So I just had the wand for the longest time. I didn't have a pack. Because nobody ever got to the pack because the pack was really expensive. And then about a year and a half ago, Hasbro came through and produced a pack based off of Ghostbusters Afterlife, and it synced up with a wand that they had released. So now I have that.
Nice.
So I have really nice looking stuff. It's nicer than a lot of other things. It lights up, got all the bells and whistles. I have a flight suit that I didn't buy from like a Halloween store. I bought it from an Army surplus. So I went through and I wanted it to look above average. I didn't want it to look cheap. And so I didn't go hard on a lot of the props because it was just too expensive to do it. And now these days, I actually have Hasbro has now done their own PKE meter and ghost trap, and that should actually be shipping to my house soon.
Still upgrading. I didn't realize you're still piecing it together. Awesome.
And when Frozen Empire got released, a lot of the AMCs did popcorn holders that were ghost traps. So I picked up 2 different ones of those too. So I have like 4 ghost traps around my house. It's absolutely
well. You
terrible.
need more than one. It's fair.
Yeah, there's never just one ghost, guys. So I have a lot, and then I have toys and stuff at my parents' house that is still in bins and boxes and stuff that I haven't touched. But yeah, it's pretty heavy duty.
My history of the Ghostbusters is pretty simple. I didn't watch it as a kid. I don't know why. I didn't grow up with these movies, but I revisited them like I was at least in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I like them. I enjoyed them, but I don't have that nostalgic connection to them. I like them. In fact, I had always thought that I had seen Ghostbusters 2. I can now confirm I've never seen this movie before this week. I know of some things through osmosis. I know about the painting, but like there was probably not a single scene that felt familiar to me, just like concept. So it was wild to actually, I was probably lying to people. Like, yeah, I've seen Ghostbusters 2, because I get asked that all the time. But now I've seen it. That's my history with the franchise. Super simple. Andrew, I'm going to make a guess here that you essentially grew up with both Ghostbusters movies and watched them as a child, maybe in like equal amounts. I'm gonna relate it to like the first 2 Ninja Turtles movies, where as a kid you watch them both. It's the I know there's 3 of them, but you watch 1 and 2. It's the Turtles. They're both great, and it's not until like you get a little bit older, have a little bit more of a critical eye, and you start to see that there might be quality differences between the 2. But like as a kid, it's just all Turtles. It's just all Ghostbusters. It's all the same. Was that your experience with these 2 movies?
To an extent. Another big piece, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when we kind of talk about the legacy of the movie itself. Real Ghostbusters, the cartoon, starts airing in the gap between Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, and then continues after Ghostbusters 2 for a decent amount of time.
I've always thought that was such a bold title for the animated series. Like,
this is the
real Ghostbusters. Forget those movies, guys. This is the real Ghostbusters.
There's an episode of The Real Ghostbusters where they are making Ghostbusters, the movie.
That sounds awfully auspicious for an 80s
The
cartoon.
end of that movie, quite literally, is them in a movie theater and the beginning of Ghostbusters plays. Like,
that sounds
I'm
fun.
not kidding. Like the actual live action movie plays on like the screen. And the guy voicing Venkman makes a joke that the guy playing Peter doesn't look anything like him, which was a joke about the cartoon because Dave Coulier of Full House fame voiced Peter Venkman to start with, and they complained that he didn't sound anything like Bill Murray, so he got replaced with Lorenzo Music.
Is that the Garfield guy?
Yes, Lorenzo is.
Because then later Bill Murray voices Garfield.
Funny how that all works. But
fun.
Anyway, so yeah, life for me it was very much the same type of thing. Like I would, they were interchangeable to me as a kid, definitely.
We're going to circle back to this because I've alluded to it already, but like this movie has an interesting place in Ghostbusters fandom and lore and its quality, and something I honestly wasn't too aware of until we started preparing for this podcast. But let's set the stage a little bit here. This movie is released June 16th, 1989. It's made on a budget of at least $30 million. Some dispute there. But at the box office, it brings in $215.4 million. A lot of money for the budget, but seen as a failure. We'll come back to that. Critically, it's split, I guess is how you say this, but ultimately not super well received. It holds a 55% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, but this is a movie from the 80s, so it's not a large sample size, but more important, I think, is just the legacy this movie has, which is just, it's not as good as the first one, and some people take it to more harsher degrees where they shouldn't have tried, they lost it, it's just the first one again, but without any of the magic. I mean, not only critics at the time, but nearly every creative person involved in this movie, from the cast to its director, have since said, yeah, that one was a misstep. Like, no one is really fighting for this movie that made the movie. And this is the part where I said, like, I wasn't too aware of this. I didn't realize this movie had such a worse reputation, because again, by the numbers, $215 box office, that sounds like a success, but given that the original made $296 million 5 years previous, you can see how it fell short of the admittedly sky high expectations that were set for this movie.
Yeah, it's odd because Ghostbusters is, and we've talked about this, I'm sure, on previous episodes. Ghostbusters as a franchise is just a very strange thing, because if you show somebody the Ghostbusters logo, they're probably going to be like, oh yeah, Ghostbusters. Like, they know what that logo is. And who designed that logo? Michael C. Gross. So Michael C. Gross, I designed that Ghostbusters logo, and it becomes super iconic. Everybody knows what that logo is. You show, like I said, you could show somebody who's probably never even seen the movies the Ghostbusters logo, and they're going to know that it's Ghostbusters. It's that synonymous of a symbol, which a lot of other stuff from the 80s and 90s doesn't have that. Like, there's not a logo from a lot of other things at that time that become that identifiable. Like, you think of superheroes, possibly stuff like Batman, Superman, that's pretty identifiable, but like Ghostbusters is probably recognizable as a logo, not on that level probably, but still pretty high. But at the same time, especially now, it feels like there's this lack of enthusiasm in a lot of ways. Like, Frozen Empire comes out, prominently features the original cast alongside these new characters, and people didn't really go and watch it. There didn't seem to be a lot of excitement. And so it's this franchise that has this definite awareness. Like, people know what Ghostbusters is, but it doesn't seem to translate into necessarily excitement about Ghostbusters, especially when they do more with Ghostbusters. And there's a whole big debate I could tell you about the different types of Ghostbusters fans. That's a whole longer discussion that maybe we'll get into later. I don't really know. But Ghostbusters 2 sits in a very strange place. And I will use to talk about this point, where Ghostbusters 2 and Ghostbusters are very different types of movies. I don't know if you rewatched Ghostbusters before you watched Ghostbusters 2.
I did not. I did not rewatch it.
Ghostbusters 2, the thing that people kind of point to is that it's a much cleaner movie. The characters have a lot of their kind of, I don't want to say scumminess, but just they're a lot more clean cut in this movie. They don't smoke. Well, there's a lot more straightforward.
I will again relate that to the Turtles franchise, where in the second one, what you don't realize as a kid is that, like, they're not using their weapons and the jokes are toned down.
Yeah.
They don't say, damn or hell.
So in Ghostbusters 2, people kind of point out that the Ghostbusters by that point are basically superheroes, for lack of a better word. The Ghostbusters in Ghostbusters 2 are superheroes. They're just straight up the good guys. And that's not that they're not the good guys in the first movie, but there's a lot more nuance to the characters. You know, the scene in Ghostbusters where they're deciding real time how much they're going to charge the guy who runs this hotel, how much they're going to charge him to get rid of Slimer. And Egon is literally like next to Bill Murray, like putting up fingers on the side of his face, telling him telling him how much to charge this guy. They're making it up on the spot. There's this kind of huckster exterminator edge to them. And because, we get rid of ghosts, and who else does that? So we can charge whatever we want. And they save the day, not necessarily because they set out to be the heroes of the day, but just because they're the only ones who maybe sort of know what to do. And then it puts them out of business, as per Ghostbusters 2. So for this movie, the grid is gone. The characters are now pretty clean cut. Bill Murray is much less of a creep. Sorry, folks, he's a massive creep in the first Ghostbusters. And so they're basically superheroes. And so it creates this weird mindset where there's people who watch the first Ghostbusters that are like, well, yeah, Ghostbusters is this cool kind of semi-edgy comedy about these guys hunting ghosts, and then they look at Ghostbusters 2 and they're like, oh, well, this is a different thing. Like this, it's just polished. It feels a lot more like it feel more toyetic, I guess. And there's no nuance now. And I think if you grew up watching real Ghostbusters, where they are also portrayed essentially as superheroes because it's a Saturday morning cartoon, and that leads into Ghostbusters 2, I think you end up having this kind of very deep appreciation of Ghostbusters 2 because it was basically a real Ghostbusters cartoon episode taken to real life. Whereas if what you grew up and digested was the original Ghostbusters, it can feel like a very different thing. And like
this
you said,
this is interesting to me because I have a very much outsider's perspective on all of this. Like, I'm not, deep in it with Ghostbusters, as I've said. I just watched this movie for the first time. But I'm not saying, like, these criticisms of the movie aren't valid, and I appreciate you providing context for why this movie holds its place it does in the fandom, but, like, these things don't inherently sound bad to me. The fact that they're superheroes now, the fact that they've evolved into this role, because that's what characters do. Like, I would imagine after the events of the first movie, they would be more confident, hold a different spot, be seen as good guys. Like, all of this sounds like a natural progression. Like, it sounds to me like, I don't know. I think you watch The Dark Knight and you're like, man, Batman really struggled in that first one. That was the appeal. And now he always has the right gadget and he's better at fighting. And it's like, well, yeah, that's what happened.
I guess what I can say to that is simply being evolving the character is fine, but at a certain point, is the goal to make them more evolved characters, or is the goal to clean it up for the kids, or is the goal to that's fair. Two things can be true. You can evolve the characters and inherently also kind of make them less interesting. You can evolve the characters and the thing is, like I said, so you end up with two kind of groups, and I think if you grew up with Ghostbusters versus kind of were already an adult when Ghostbusters came out, I think it can lead to a different expectation. Now, fans, I will say fans in a royal sense, have largely come around on Ghostbusters 2. I don't know if it's because of what happened later, but overall, they kind of grew to appreciate it because for the longest time, Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 was all they had. So it was kind of that mindset of like, well, okay, is it really that bad? And people were like, no, not really. Like, is it just kind of doing the same thing? Yeah, but seeing them back as the characters is fun. Having them just on another Ghostbusting adventure, even if it's just kind of the same thing. There's still a lot of fun to be had here.
Yeah.
And then again, the fact that the franchise lays dormant for so long. And I think that partly also kind of leads to the possessive nature fans have of it. Because for so long, they basically had to entertain themselves with what existed. When something new comes about, they want it to be for them, for lack of a better way to put it. And that can lead to some questionable behavior when it comes to their thoughts on what the franchise should be. Which is, we've talked about it with Star Wars, we've talked about it with Ghostbusters already. So it sits in a very weird spot where for the longest time, and I guess if I had to split it a little bit more, I think diehard Ghostbuster fans will almost all tell you they like Ghostbusters 2. I think when it comes to the more casual fan that really likes the first movie, they might be the ones that are kind of like, yeah, it's just kind of a rehash. It's whatever. I don't think anybody hates Ghostbusters 2 on that level, but I do think there are people who do see it kind of like, yeah, we're just basically going off and doing the same thing. And they're basically like, when Frozen Empire was gearing up, there were people who looked at that trailer and I was like, this just looks like a superhero movie now. Like, it doesn't feel like any of the grit of Ghostbusters remains. And I think you can look at it that way. I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at it, but it does end up sitting in a very strange place. Now, I'm sure most of the people listening to this are probably big fans of it. I told my friend Keith that we were covering it on the show, and he was like, "What? Why?" Like, he had no idea that the movie was rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. He had no clue.
Yeah.
And a lot of fans don't, because they're like, "How could you dislike Ghostbusters 2?" So
before I like
thing.
researched this, I thought we were like bending our own rules
No.
a little bit to feature it, which is fine. We do that sometimes, but yeah, it is safe to say this movie is poorly received at the time and still by a lot of people. But this is all just provide context. Of course, what we're gonna do once we jump into it is talk about the positives, talk about what we like. There's plenty of this in this movie that works, and I'm excited to talk about, again, as someone who's just seen this movie for the first time. As far as the creative team behind the movie, just like the first one, it's written by Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd. We're going to talk to them when we get to the cast, obviously. The movie's directed once again. Did I say that? We're going to talk about them.
I was like, man, dang impressive, especially in Harold Ramis'
really burying
case.
the lead here. Oh, by the way, we have archival footage of, all right, no. Yeah. The movie's directed by Ivan Reitman. Just got to acknowledge that. Dude directed a lot of comedies. Has some controversies. I don't really want to sit here and praise him, but got to acknowledge our director here. He's dead now. And that's that. Andrew, I'm ready to talk about this movie. Are you ready to discuss Ghostbusters 2?
Yeah.
Five years after saving the city from disaster, the Ghostbusters are struggling to find work. That is until they discover a river of slime beneath the city that responds to negative emotions. This causes mischievous ghosts to run amok yet again, and the Ghostbusters find themselves back in business. This mayhem becomes personal when Dana Barrett's baby is abducted to be used as the vessel to bring back Vigo the Carpathian, a medieval tyrant with godlike powers. And that's it, Andrew. That's it. That's the setup. The Ghostbusters are sort of down on their luck in their beginning. People have moved on. But then ghosts return, the Ghostbusters are back in business, and we get a big bad. We're going to talk more about this plot, specifically comparisons to the first one. We'll get to it. But of course, the first thing we're going to do is talk about this cast. And we're going to start with the best casting, best performance of the film, because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who's getting your Mark Strong Award for Ghostbusters 2?
I had no question who I thought I was giving.
Can I make a prediction?
Sure.
I don't think we've ever discussed this. Real quick. Are you giving the Mark Strong Award to your favorite Ghostbuster?
No.
Okay, I have no idea where you're going now.
Really?
I think I don't know where you're going now. Can I ask you who I think your favorite Ghostbuster is?
Sure.
Is your favorite Ghostbuster... I have to look at the cast. This is how
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
How disrespectful.
Is it Egon?
Probably now, yeah.
Okay.
There was a time where it was probably like Ray, but when Harold Ramis passed, and like my deep love and appreciation of Harold Ramis's work and what he's done, it's probably Egon now.
Well, you're a Donatello guy. Again, to bring it back to Ninja Turtles. I don't know why I keep doing that.
The smart one.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, okay, I continue. Who's getting your Mark Strong Award?
Peter McNichol as Janusz Poha is getting my Mark Strong Award.
I did not see this coming. I did not see this coming at all.
He is. There's an honest trailer for Ghostbusters 2 that spends a lot of time talking about how bad the movie is. But there's one line in that movie that in that review that I've always remembered, and it's like, and also starring. And at one point, it's like Peter McNichol, the only guy who looks like he's having fun being in this movie. And
wow.
Hashtag PP. But he looks like he is having an absolute blast playing this character, Janusz Poha, who is a small character that kind of starts featuring more and more as the movie goes through. But he starts off as being like the art director of the museum that Dana Barrett works at. He shows up and he's the guy who puts the Vigo the Carpathian painting on display. This is his doing. He doesn't realize what it is. But he eventually gets brainwashed by Vigo into helping him and assisting him with his mission, and ends up being kind of this instrument that he uses in the real world to set up what he's trying to accomplish. And he is so funny as this character. He's the guy that says your intro line, everything you're doing is bad. I just want you to know that. He is the best thing I like about his character is that at a certain point, he gets very bored when Vigo talks. This is a gag that starts showing up as Vigo speaks to him later in the movie, and there's a really prominent scene, but I texted you about it, but it's the one where he's like, I await the words of Vigo, and then he immediately like looks at his watch, and it's just like waiting for time to pass, and then like Vigo appears, and he's like, he starts introducing himself, and he's like, the Sorrow. He's like, yes, Sorrow, I've heard all of this. Like, he literally just says to the man, I've heard you say all of this before. Like, he's just done with the man's shtick at this point, but is still brainwashed and helping him. And the idea of somebody that's brainwashed but still assisting is just so funny to me. Like, they're brainwashed, but like they're bored with what they're like. He's like, I get it. You're whatever, fine. And he eventually realizes there's things that, he can get from Vigo that he wants, which is primarily he wants Dana. So don't get me wrong. He's got some not altruistic motives of his own, but we don't know how much that's being exacerbated by being under Vigo's control. But the way he plays the character, the delivery he gives of things, I love this character. He is so funny, and he is just perfect. And if I had a nickel for every comedy in the 90s where Peter McNichol played somebody brainwashed, I'd have 2 nickels. Because
what else is it?
It's Renfield and Dracula Dead and Loving It. But
fantastic.
And then he also features as one of the camp counselors in Addams Family Values, another one of my favorite 90s comedies.
Right, that is him. I can see it now. Oh my gosh.
The one who's like, you're destroying my text when he's talking about his Thanksgiving play he gave to children.
Depending on the play, and he's like reminding them to smile.
Like I said, getting all upset that they're not honoring his words. But so he's this great character actor. Showed up on a bunch of television shows too, but just the way he plays Janusz throughout this movie, with just sort of starting off as just kind of your normal jerk boss, as he gets descends into kind of madness, and then ultimately they just hose him with the mood slime and he turns into the nicest man in the world. I love what he's doing with this character. I think it's immensely funny. He makes me laugh so much when I watch this movie. It's perfect.
I mean, this is a fantastic pick. I didn't see it coming, but I love the performance, maybe even more than I realized going into this. It's very funny. He's got I don't know if they ever say where he's from. It's just like a vaguely European.
Well, he says he's from the Upper West Side, which is part of New York. So, that's clearly not the real answer.
Right. Okay. It's part of the joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I agree. Definitely looks like he's having a blast. He is absolutely hilarious and really elevating the movie to the role through true Mark Strong Award fashion, because Genuinely. This could have been played by someone who isn't stealing scenes, isn't getting laughs, isn't going this hard. The movie still functions fine. I like henchman to the main villain typically isn't like a scene stealing role, but he is able to do that with his performance. So
you think of Bob from Batman. Bob is a funny standout character, but he's not upstaging Joker. He's not
Correct.
Being a more memorable character. So, but here I would argue that Janusz is a more memorable character than Vigo in some capacity, because Vigo is kind of just a head floating in a painting for most of this movie.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Yeah, it's very, very funny. I love it.
Well, Andrew, great pick. I'm going somewhere else with it, but fantastic pick. For me, again, as I said, never seen this movie before. Never a huge Ghostbusters fan. I like Ghostbusters, but it's just not something I watch all the time. But getting into this, I never had a favorite Ghostbuster before, because I just was never passionate about it. But I have a favorite Ghostbuster coming out of this movie, and it's who I would assume is your favorite because of a lot of their qualities. Harold Ramis as Egon Spangler. Am I saying that right, Andrew? I don't even know if I'm saying his name right.
Yes, you are.
Is getting my Mark Strong award. I absolutely love this character. And I love Harold Ramis for reasons you were alluding to a minute ago, and we'll get to it. But Egon as I mean, all Ghostbusters are nerds and scientists, but he is clearly the nerdy one, the smart one. And he plays a nerd in such a refreshing way, especially for the 80s, because he doesn't fall into a lot of the usual traps. Tongue-tied when there's a pretty girl, and he uses big words, but he uses it like to intentionally be condescending to like Vinkman or something. It's not like he just uses it like Billy from Power Rangers. Who just unnecessarily like uses a thesaurus for every sentence because the writers think that's what smart people sound like. It's not like that. He uses them with intention, which I think, again, it's just such an elevated view of the typical 80s nerd. And he's so likable, and him and Vinkman are usually at odds, but he is not like just routinely the butt of the joke. He holds his own. He has his own way of, again, kind of pushing back. I don't know. It's just, there's tiers and layers to the nerd character that you just don't typically see, especially for that time period. And he's my favorite. There's characteristics about all the Ghostbusters that I like, but I found myself responding the most to Harold Ramis as Egon. And it kind of makes sense because for 2016 Ghostbusters, Kate McKinnon's character, I think, was the closest. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Analog.
Thank you. And she was easily my favorite there. So I find myself drawn to this character type. I think he plays it so well. Love Harold Ramis. I mean, I've heard nothing but great stories about this guy as an actor, as a writer, as a director. He goes on to do tons of other movies and TV shows. I'm, like many people, listening to Office Ladies podcast, and he directed at least one episode there, and they all had just such nice things to say about him and how giving he was and always willing to have a mentor role or share stories about all the crazy stuff that he's been a part of. So yeah, big fan of the guy on screen and otherwise. Love his performance here. I officially have a favorite Ghostbuster. It's Egon, Mark Strong Award winner, Harold Ramis.
I am very glad you gave this to Harold Ramis because he does deserve one of these. I just couldn't get past my love of the Yadish character. But the thing about Harold Ramis that I think is so interesting is that I think there are a good amount of people who know him as Egon and don't realize what else he's done. Even before Ghostbusters comes out, that man had already written Animal House, Meatballs, Caddyshack, wrote and starred in Stripes, and directed National Lampoon's Vacation. All of that is before Ghostbusters.
I did not realize he directed Vacation. Even
he does. He directs the first one. He doesn't write it, but he directs it. Which is the year before Ghostbusters. And then, like I said, he's a writer on. Oh, and he also directs Caddyshack. My mistake. Like, he also writes and directs Caddyshack. So he had directed 2 movies before Ghostbusters ever comes out, and had written several. He was a writer on and a actor in some cases on Second City Television in the mid to late 70s. He then, after Ghostbusters, goes on to have a relatively prolific career. Some successes, some failures. Eventually does Ghostbusters 2, but then writes and directs things like Groundhog Day, which is supposedly the movie that like shattered his relationship with Bill Murray and was a huge holdup in the delays on Ghostbusters 3 for the longest time. He did direct Stewart Saves His Family, so not all hits, but also directs another one of my favorite comedies ever, starring our boy Michael Keaton, Multiplicity. I love that movie so much, and he directs that. He also does Analyze This, Analyze That, and he talks about those a lot. He did do Bedazzled, which I think is a little bit of an underrated Brendan Fraser comedy. And then one of his last movies that he does one called The Ice Harvest, which is about John Cusack as a hitman. It's so good. It's so funny. And then he does finish it off with Year One, which isn't super great. But he was working for a long time and was always giving it his best effort, and was still making stuff that I thought was extremely funny. And like you said, ends up directing 4 episodes of The Office. I don't remember all 4 of them, but came back to that a lot. So people know him as Egon, but they kind of don't know that, like, for the longest time, and especially later on, he kind of phases into far more just behind the camera. Does occasionally show up in films. I know he showed up as Seth Rogen's dad in Knocked Up and other places like that, and had a few bit appearances here and there. But he is very, very talented, and I think losing him definitely made whatever Ghostbusters stuff comes next a different thing. Because without Egon, it is a very different thing. And I'm not saying you can't do stuff without him. I'm not going to go that far, but it definitely leaves a very large hole in Ghostbusters without Egon, because he is such an important character. The way it's always kind of been described is Dan Aykroyd would come up with these insane, supernatural, lofty ideas, and Harold Ramis is the one who kind of made it palatable for audiences. He's the one that kind of figured out how to strike the balance. Sure. He did this really great thing. There was a video he did where he kind of talked about his comedy influences, and he mentioned Night at the Opera by the Marx Brothers, which is where that clip I sent you from, where they're in the room on the ship, and that's the Marx Brothers, and people just keep coming into the room. Yes. That's a clip he showed there, and that was how I actually found and started watching Marx Brothers movies. And I was like, it's so fun. There's like 19 gags all building in that one scene, and I'm like, who comes up with this in the 40s? Like, like, it's this crazy idea. And mentioned all these classic comedy things that he loved. Talked about, he mentioned, like, Analyze This got him a little bit more mileage out of Hollywood, because in the 90s, it very much was like, if it wasn't a hit, you started struggling, and they wouldn't call you for stuff. Whereas now it feels like it's the complete opposite. But he's such a funny man. He was so creative. And looking through his filmography, there's probably at least 6 or 8 things he's done that you're like, oh wow, that's super funny. And it's like, yep, because that's the kind of guy he was. He knew how to make something pretty funny and pretty palatable for audiences, and would take these, even like Multiplicity. Like, you forget that Multiplicity is technically a science fiction movie because it's about cloning, because it's just Michael Keaton's home life and how getting clones made it worse. It's
I don't know what theme we're going to come up with to cover Multiplicity, but we have to cover that. We gotta do it.
But anyway, I love Harold Ramis. I could talk about him for another hour if I wanted to, but I won't. We're already at like 50 minutes on this record, and we haven't even gotten through the rest of the cast yet. But
well, I think what you're saying makes a lot of. I mean, he clearly has a great mind for comedy and for storytelling, because this movie, or it's Ghostbusters franchise, like the first one, could have been like a wacky SNL type movie, which,
yes,
I don't really mean as a bad thing, but I kind of do. But he's the reason it becomes considered an all-time great comedy, great whatever category you want to put it in, genuinely good movie, rather than just a wacky idea that they have a lot of fun with. So I think what you're saying speaks a lot of truth about he's a ingredient that is hard to replace.
A vital piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Both the character of Egon and what he's doing creatively. All right, let's talk about some of the Ghostbusters. Bill Murray as Peter Venkman. Bill Murray had to have come up on this podcast at some point. I don't know if we've ever officially covered him. Look, he's a tough one. Oftentimes we just skip over people because they've done some permanent stuff in the personal life that it's like, it feels weird to praise them. Bill Murray's a tough one. He's a hero to a lot of people, but there's just the amount of horrible stories about him just seems to grow every year. And there's a new story comes out, and then you hear 10 old stories resurface, and it's just, the guy seems to have a lot of personal demons and problems, and history of very bad behavior. Very Chevy Chase in that way. So I don't know. It's odd to me that Bill Murray has the career though, and Chevy Chase doesn't. Because I'm thinking with Bill, it was, he got super famous first, and then was just able to keep riding that. And then with Chevy, he kind of burned the bridges first.
and it
Yeah.
made being famous a lot more difficult. Not that Chevy Chase doesn't obviously have hits; he obviously does. I'm not going to say that Chevy Chase hasn't
Different
made big
career
movies,
paths. For
definitely
sure.
different career paths. Bill Murray is a very difficult one, though. I know plenty of fans that struggle with that. They struggle with loving Ghostbusters and the stories about Bill Murray, and I'm like, but there's just too many to really avoid it, and so that's really all I'm going to say about Bill Murray at this point.
The character of Peter Venkman is hilarious. I don't even always click with Bill Murray in a lot of his movies. I'm pretty hit or miss, but as Peter Venkman in these first two movies, he's got some of the best deliveries.
I mean, he's the star of these
lines.
movies. If you're being honest, Bill Murray is the star of Ghostbusters. Bill Murray is the star of Ghostbusters 2. I know people are like, it's an ensemble, and I'm like, it is, but clearly in the first movie and the second movie, there's a lot of focus on Bill Murray's character. As said in the second one, especially his relationship with like Sigourney Weaver, like that is arguably the driving force of the movie. It is an ensemble, but Bill Murray is getting a lot more than anybody else.
We will still talk about his lines and scenes and stuff that works when we get to it. No worries. Dan Aykroyd plays Raymond Stantz. Ray. I at least know that. They just call him Ray. An alum of the show from Coneheads. The character of Ray, an alum of the show from Casper. We've talked about it before. Dan Aykroyd is one that I've sometimes wondered, perhaps unfairly, like, is Dan Aykroyd that funny? He is. But he is, from where I sit, one of the more selfless comedic actors from this era, from both SNL and the movie that he's in. He seems to always be willing to let someone else take the big laugh and be the setup guy or the straight man. And he's so good at it that I have wondered if Dan Aykroyd is funny. He is funny. He is one of the creative people behind this franchise and many other things that I dearly love. And I really like the character of Ray. In this movie, I didn't rewatch the first one. I'm not sure how strong it is there, but he is so optimistic and just happy to be doing what he loves more than any of the other characters. It's so infectious. He's got that hashtag PP mindset before that was even a thing on our podcast. I think of the birthday party scene where he's
still putting on the face. Like, he's still putting on the face even when it's just a birthday party
loves
for kids.
Even though it is demeaning, and he's just happy to be a Ghostbuster. I love that attitude. So great. Yeah, I love, our four Ghostbusters are all filling an important role as part of the greater team. Again, very Ninja Turtles in that way. I can't help but think of like their four distinct personalities and roles they're filling. I love Ray's role here, and of course Dan Aykroyd for bringing that to life.
Dan Aykroyd, I like Dan Aykroyd a lot. He's another one that kind of, I don't think it was necessarily because he made anybody mad. I don't know if it's because of all the alien stuff. I don't know, but he definitely fell out of favor at a certain point. I think there was a point where people kind of were like, all right, Dan Aykroyd's not bringing the people out anymore. So he kind of got reduced to small roles. But like, you look at his filmography and there's something. Every year there's something that's not necessarily a small part. There was a period of time there where it looked like he was doing the supporting stuff in a couple of Adam Sandler movies. I know he shows up in 50 First Dates and I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry. Ended up there a little bit. Shows up here and there, but definitely in a small kind of bit part that is meant mostly for you to just be like, oh yeah, hey, Dan Aykroyd. He has kept the torch burning for Ghostbusters a lot. He has been the one who's wanted to do another one the most. He wrote a spec script for Ghostbusters 3 when nobody paid him to, because he wanted to do it so badly. That was the ever gestating, I believe it was going to be Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent, and the whole premise was Ghostbusters in hell. Basically, the Ghostbusters find themselves in this kind of hell-like dimension. And Harold Ramis even commented on that once. He was like, all right, sure. Like, it's no stranger than anything else, I guess, at this point. But,
sure.
They never really got too far to making it an actual thing. And I've read
it sounds very much like Beetlejuice in Hawaii. It's like, let's just put him in a different location.
Well, it's that kind of thing too, where it's like, okay, we're sending the Ghostbusters to hell. Like, what do you do with that? Like, what do they do there? Like, what do they? They can't defeat hell, right? Like, they can't do that. But anyway, he's tried to keep that flame burning for a really long time, and I think I mentioned it on there's an episode, but his role in Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, the movie's got a pretty mixed reception. Frozen Empire is another movie that we could have done this month, and it may show up in the future. Who knows? But maybe we'll do a fourth installments month or a fifth installments month, and we can do Frozen Empire. But,
Okay. So specific.
but there's lines in that movie where you can just tell how much playing this character means to him. You can tell that he just loves playing this character. You can tell that there's this childlike wonder to the character. Ignoring that particular scene from Ghostbusters, you all know the one I'm talking about. But just this fascination with what they do, this drive to know more about it, this whole thing, and then in Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, it kind of reaches its natural conclusion where he's literally like, it's Winston that tells him, he's like, you got to stop this. This is not how you're supposed to spend the rest of your life. And he looks at him and he just says, but this is how I want to spend the rest of my life. And in that moment, I'm like, I don't know if it's Ray saying that or if it's Dan saying that, but it works either way. And it's very wholesome, and you can just tell, even here, like you said, just that Dan Aykroyd clearly loves playing this character. And in that regard, almost alone, if they want to do more Ghostbusters movies, I'm fine, as long as Dan Aykroyd gets to keep having that look of childhood wonder on his face every time he gets to be this character.
You mentioned Winston, our fourth Ghostbuster, of course, played by the wonderful Ernie Hudson. If there's, we're kind of talking about all their personalities and the role they fill, he is certainly the everyman, certainly audience surrogate for many people. I mean, I don't have to be steeped in the Ghostbusters fandom to know I'm going to sound like a broken record where I'm going to say, I wish we had more Winston. I wish he was in the movie more. I wish he got more lines. It seems to be true of both of these two installments, but I love what he brings whenever he is part of the dynamic. It's just weird that he's missing from that dynamic so much. I sort of went down a rabbit hole here. I texted you a little bit about this movie after I watched it, because you had said to me that he drops out of the movie for no reason for a significant part of the runtime. And I was like, okay, they have like some weird plot contrivance, but he literally just disappears for no reason for a significant portion and for some major scenes of this movie. It's very odd. I went down a rabbit hole here and kind of refreshed myself on something I know I knew at one point, but that they pursued Eddie Murphy for this role for the original, and there's conflicting reports about whether or not he signed, he didn't sign, he did Beverly Hills Cop instead. That's all that matters, which makes sense. He's the star of a movie versus ensemble, whatever. But they then hire Ernie Hudson and reduce the role in the first movie because they don't have the big star Eddie Murphy. On paper, this all makes sense, but there's some clear racial undertones throughout. To the point where Ernie Hudson isn't on the poster for Ghostbusters 1, and Ghostbusters 2 is still not on the original poster. There's more than one poster for this movie. He does feature more prominently in the marketing, but not equal footing with the other four. And Ernie Hudson's been very honest about this. How it's affected him psychologically. Like, I can clearly see what's going on there. He doesn't have any ill will towards any of the creators or any of his fellow cast. He feels like he was treated okay, but I'm paraphrasing and adding my own editorializing here. He seems to say it's more of a systematic reason for these exclusions and from just the general ominous studio and not any one person.
I'm sure the long and short of it is you can obviously there's a racial undertone to it, but it's unfortunate that despite the success of the franchise, he just viewed him as lesser than the rest of them. You can say that that's a fame thing. You can say that the others were bigger celebrities than he was, but literally, like, he's on one of the Ghostbusters 2 posters because it's just a shot of all four of them standing there, but he's not in the top billing. Rick Moranis is billed above Ernie Hudson in this movie.
He's one of the Ghostbusters. It's wild. It's wild. And I don't know. I mean, like, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and Dan Aykroyd clearly have a connection well beyond this franchise. They've, from SNL and other creative projects and other movies that Ernie Hudson doesn't have. But, like, by the time you get to the second movie 5 years later, he's got a connection, guys. Like, anyway, again, I'm sure this is well-worn territory amongst Ghostbusters discourse, but I will just have to acknowledge it, though. Like, it's just so blatant.
Ernie Hudson has still had an extremely prolific career.
For sure.
He goes to conventions and wears the Ghostbusters suit and stuff for photo ops. If Dan Aykroyd was championing the most for another movie, Ernie is definitely the one who kind of kept it alive for the fans. He would do appearances. He would do Ghostbuster stuff. He never had a problem doing any of that. He had no problem just living that for the fans. So, like, he would go to shows. Like I said, he'd wear the gear, or at least the jumpsuit. He'd sign posters. He's no issue doing any of that. And you look at his filmography, clearly much more of like a character actor than the rest of them. Shows up on all sorts of different television shows. Shows up in all sorts of different movies. Even got to get into the David Lynch world a little bit with Twin Peaks' return in 2017. So he's gotten to work with some really great people, gotten to do a lot of really cool stuff. And at the end of the day, like I said, he definitely kept that candle burning for the fans for a really long time. And I like that in the newer movies, especially in Frozen Empire, he is given a relatively prominent role. He bankrolls the whole thing now. That's the whole story that he's gotten now in Frozen Empire, is that he owns the Ghostbusters franchise business, basically. He's this massive, successful businessman, and he bankrolls it, so he's at the top of the chain in the new movies. And again, that'd be something else where I'd be more than happy to see these continue, just to see Ernie Hudson kind of be in that prominent position that he should have been the whole time. Well, maybe not, at a certain point he should have been in.
It's a little wild to me that Sigourney Weaver plays the character of Dana, who's just like, I don't know, she features so heavily in the plot of the first one, and they find a way to bring her back here. It's more about her child, but she's just like Venkman's love interest. I don't know. Sigourney Weaver, and this is probably just like hindsight thing, she's like one of our premier actors, one of the classiest ladies in the business, just like top tier, and she's just not that prominent. I don't know. She seems above this role, star power wise. I mean, Alien is already in the bag by now. Aliens, like, Aliens is in the bag after Ghostbusters 2, but not Ghostbusters 1. So right,
I can sort of understand it there, and I feel like the only reason she's here is just because she was in the first one and they were trying to bring all the people back. But it does feel a little weird, and I've noticed that because, like, it's Alien in '79, which is 5 years before Ghostbusters, where she basically plays the damsel in distress. Like, she obviously gets a lot to work with, being possessed and doing a lot of that, but like, her job in that movie is to be saved, which I'm not saying you can't still be a strong character while doing that, but when you look at something like Alien and contrast it with Ghostbusters, it feels like a different character. And then when you contrast like Aliens with Ghostbusters 2, you're like, this is even more of a departure, because in Aliens, she's, you get your classic lines, her in a giant mech suit fighting a giant alien queen, and then in Ghostbusters 2, she's tied up by a vacuum hose and can't save her child from this ghost painting. It's like, it's very weird. Now, again, I'm watching these movies wrong. I fully understand it, but it is a very interesting career, and I guess that just speaks to acting.
She's awesome though, and holds her own against Bill Murray's Venkman, and they have some genuine chemistry, which is I couldn't ever imagine that couple in real life, but they make it work in the movie. Again, acting. She's fantastic. Alum of the show, maybe Mark Strong Award winner, who knows? But Sigourney Weaver, she is wonderful. Rick Moranis, you mentioned earlier, got to talk about him as Louis Tully, the fifth Ghostbuster, Andrew. I mean, he's got a jumpsuit by the end. I know we've talked, he's come up before, and I know I've said this on mic before, but as a kid, hated Rick Moranis.
Why?
He annoyed me so much. Just his dopey, look and characters he always played, whether it's Honey I Shrunk the Kids or Little Giants. I mean, he was all over my childhood, and I just it's this face that he makes Andrew this all the time. It's great for a podcast, I know.
Everyone saw that.
I get older and I love the guy because he's so good at this, which is what annoyed me as a kid, but he's so good at it. And I realize like how much skill and talent that actually takes. And I see him in things now like Little Shop of Horrors, which I didn't watch as a kid, but I'm like, well, this is you're fantastic. And he is certainly one of America's sweethearts, I think it's safe to say. I think most people know of his rather tragic yet brave and heroic personal life stories where after the passing of his wife, he steps away from the spotlight and acting to be with his family and raise his kids, and honestly like stuck to it. Didn't like reemerge and try to reclaim his career. Like he devoted his life to that, which is awesome. Seems like a wonderful dude and clearly super talented actor that I did not give credit to as a child, but I'm certainly giving him his flowers now as a mature adult.
Have we talked about him before? I feel like we've talked about him before, but I don't know why we would have talked about him before. Flintstones. That's why. We talked about him on Flintstones. Anyway, you pretty much said it all. Obviously, the story of him. So, yeah, his wife dies in 91, I think, and then he keeps going about 96, 97. I think 97 is his last live-action role for the longest time. And he does a couple of voice things in the ensuing years. A couple of television appearances. A couple of things there. Showed up for a couple of things here and there in the last several years. And I'm sure I mentioned at the time, he's supposed to come back for like a legacy sequel to Honey I Shrunk the Kids, but that's kind of been in a weird spot, and we don't know if that's there. I think the other thing he showed up in a Mint Mobile commercial with Ryan Reynolds, and
I was gonna bring that up. Ryan Reynolds, that's like the one live action thing I've seen him in, and it's like. But
I will say this, like. Ryan Reynolds, I don't know if he's just a big SCTV fan. I don't know. SCTV, that is. But Ryan Reynolds loves his classic Canadian comedians. Like he, in that commercial with Rick Moranis, his whole gimmick in that commercial is he's like, thanks for coming, Rick Moranis. Like, so nice. Like, he's just so jazzed to be standing next to Rick Moranis.
Yeah.
And then he also loves John Candy. Ryan Reynolds has done a lot of tributes to John Candy. And I also love John Candy. John Candy was actually supposed to play this role in the first movie. He was going to play the character much differently, obviously, but when Candy ran into some scheduling issues, they brought in Rick Moranis, and it is a wonderful performance. I like that they find a way to bring him into the fold for this. It could have been easy to just leave him as a character from the original. A lot of fans were hoping that he would show up in some of the newer endeavors, but has not happened as of yet. But
I was surprised going into this movie how Lewis and Dana don't feel forced. They find a way to work him in pretty seamlessly, even though it's obvious they're just, behind the scenes, they just had to find ways to write in these well-known actors to the sequel. Yeah. But they do it pretty successfully, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Which I was surprised
by.
They
even, like the joke at the end of the first movie, like he even says, like he says they're the Ghostbusters, and Rick Moranis' character is like, who does your taxes? Like, because they set up that he's an accountant and he does these things. So you've got to build it in that, why wouldn't you bring him in for this? And then obviously the lawyer thing, I think that's all very well done. Rick Moranis is just great. And I didn't even mention like the Bob and Doug McKenzie stuff from SCTV, which is also one of my favorite things. The movie Strange Brew that Dave Thomas and Rick Moranis do is just wonderful. Rick Moranis is great, and I'm never going to be sad to see him on my screen. And yeah, gets a chance to get in on the action here towards the end of the film. Has one of my favorite lines that I'll mention later on in the scene section. But yeah, Rick Moranis is absolutely fantastic.
I think that covers like our heavy players, but I just have to mention Annie Potts.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
I would say Annie Potts is on level with Rick Moranis largely, so that definitely needs a shout out.
As the character of Janine, I guess no disrespect. Hers, I don't want to say anything backhanded, but I guess maybe hers feels a little more forced as far as getting her screen time, but whatever. She's just a delight on screen in anything I've ever seen her in. Prolific acting career as well as voice acting, maybe most famously as Bo Peep from the Toy Story franchise. But she's just so likable. I don't know. She just brings a good energy to this movie.
She's definitely playing more towards the cartoon portrayal of Janine here. She's got the different hair. She's got the big glasses, speaking in a much more New York accent, I guess. Whereas she didn't really do that in the first movie. In the first movie, she looked kind of just like Annie Potts. She goes back to that look in Afterlife, and then kind of has like an interesting hybrid of everything in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So she did come back for the last two movies. She does feature in those. And then she herself gets in on the action in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire slightly. So she gets to suit up in that one. So I thought that was another cool moment that they were able to use for Frozen Empire. But here, she's still the Ghostbusters secretary. Doesn't have quite a whole lot going on here. Does make out with Rick Moranis a lot, so good for them, I guess. But,
yeah, it's a win for both of them.
Yeah, for everybody, for all of us, baby. But it's it's a fun performance. But yeah, it's pretty limited. And yeah, it's fun. If you don't mind, there's one more person I do want to shout out, just because.
Is it Kurt Fuller as Jack?
It's absolutely Kurt
He's
Fuller
so
as Jack
good.
Burtmeyer.
He's so good.
So he basically takes on like the William Atherton, Walter Peck role in this movie. He plays an assistant to the mayor who basically hates the Ghostbusters. He doesn't want them near the mayor. He thinks they mess everything up. He doesn't want them in the way. Is ultimately the one that has them committed later in the movie. But he's just so good at playing a jerk in this movie. And I know him from like, he played Zachariah on Supernatural, where he's playing like a very serious character. He also played the coroner Woody on Psych, where he's also extremely funny.
He's such a that guy actor.
He is. He really is. Television especially, like he shows up all over the place, does tons of voice work, all over the place. He's just but every time I see him, I think he's very, very funny.
He's the sheriff in a Scary Movie.
He is, yes. Or no, the sheriff. Is it Scary Movie? Is it the sheriff that he plays? I think.
Yeah,
he's Sheriff Burke. Yeah. Very funny. And just, he's funny. There's not much else to say about it, but I just want to point out that he's extremely, extremely good here at playing that Walter Peck-esque, like the administrative bureaucrat who's getting in the way of the Ghostbusters.
Yes.
Even if he's not technically wrong in what he's doing, it's causing problems. Because like in the first movie, I'll say this, Walter Peck, 100% justified in everything he was asking the Ghostbusters. Like, it's not at all strange that the Environmental Protection Agency is like, so what exactly is it you're doing here? Like, it's not that weird, but because Bill Murray's a jerk, he gets them put in jail. This one, he's a little bit less noble in his intentions. He just thinks they're in the way, has them committed. There's actually a whole subplot of this movie that gets cut out of Lewis's cousin, I think, who is going to be played by Eugene Levy, who worked at that mental institution and is instrumental in getting them out. Like, so there was actually a subplot on how they get out of the prison beyond Lewis just showing up and saying, hey, they're the Ghostbusters, let's go. But they cut it out, which I get. The movie's already probably plenty long enough as is. But yeah, just want to shout out Kurt Fuller. He's always super funny, but here he's doing his job perfectly well. I love that, like, at one point the mayor is like, all right, call the Ghostbusters. And he's like, they're unavailable. He's just like, oh no. And then when he gets thrown out and fired, the first thing he says is, but the election, if the city's destroyed, the election at all is going to matter.
Fantastic shout out, Andrew. We got to move on to scenes because this is on its way to be the longest episode ever. So, you know what we're going to do. We're going to start with the best scene of the film, or at least our personal favorite. So, Andrew, kick us off here. What is the best scene when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Ghostbusters 2?
It is the courtroom scene. Top to bottom, 100%. It's my favorite scene in the movie. I think it's when you feel the chemistry of the original characters all at its most prominent. The setup is funny. The guy who plays the judge, I think Harris Yulin is his name. Perfect in this judge that just utter contempt for these guys. Just hates them. Can't stand them, and then forced to kind of acknowledge that, oh, I guess you're the ones that actually have to help me now. The Scoleri brothers, I think, are a very cool design, just a very cool idea of just two ghosts that got this judge sent to the chair, and now they're back to get him. And so the Ghostbusters have to suit up, do their thing. One of the most notable lines in the movie is where they all turn on the proton packs for the first time, and it goes Do, Ray, and then Egon just says Egon because I guess he assumes they're just saying their names at that point.
So good.
It's very, very good, very funny. When Venkman puts on the pack and it's so heavy, he says, "I always hated this part of the business," which is a line that I've stolen endlessly anytime I have to pick up something heavy ever. Like I pick up my goalie bag to go play hockey, and I'm like, I always hated this part of the business. But
I assume you say it when you put on your Ghostbusters costume as well.
Of course. 100%.
Obligated to at that point.
You have to. You can't not do it. But anyway, this scene is just very, very funny. It's got all of it's the three main Ghostbusters kind of right back in the groove of it. It's their big re-debut to the world as well. It's where they get to kind of, this leads into a montage set to Run DMC, which, how much more 1989 can you get? But it's a lot of fun. And not even just the ghost busting stuff, but just the build up with the court scene where Rick Moranis is trying to lead them through this, and he gives a statement, and I love when Egon's like, "Very good, Lewis, short but pointless," which is another line I've definitely stolen many, many times. Where they're going through and Lewis is like, and I love at the end when the judge rescinds the order and they're allowed to use their stuff, and Rick Moranis is literally like, "All right, I won the case." Like, he just literally has nothing to do with what's going on. He's just really stoked that he's won a legal case. So there's a lot of just funny, great stuff happening here with just some tremendously talented comedic actors, and it ultimately leads to the Ghostbusters re-emerging into the world, which is pretty important for the plot of this movie.
Yeah, you gotta get there, which is it's a problem the movie created. You could have believed they were still famous, but it reminds me a little bit of Transformers 2, which is as far as I made it in that series, but the Transformers are still a secret, and I'm like, how? After what happened in the first movie, how do we not all know Transformers exist? Anyway, this is a great pick. This is a very fun scene, very cool, just classic ghost busting, and I love the look of the ghosts in these movies, the way they're these weird puppet like creatures, they don't. I mean, they kind of have the cake and eat it too. Some of them just look like dead people, but I feel like the more evil they are, the more weird and contorted they are. Slimer doesn't look like humanoid in any way. These guys definitely look very exaggerated, which I was wondering how the judge recognizes the Scoleri brothers. Or is this actually what they look like? Were they just horribly disfigured, distinct-looking people? And that's how he's able to recognize them? I don't know. I'm watching the movie wrong, I guess, but it's great. I mean, the visuals in these movies look dated because of course they do, but they hold up so well. And I'm just in awe of the insane amount of work that goes into making this, because these aren't CG characters. These are filmed puppets that are superimposed, but they always take it one step further where they sometimes have the puppet on a rig on set, but they take out part of the set so it can go through a wall and then film it again with the wall intact and put that together. There's so much that goes into it that you don't have to do now. So it's just, I don't know, yeah, in all, again, of how much work goes into these effects. Sometimes that lasts, a flash on a screen or a matter of seconds, and it's just so much prep work to make it come to life.
Especially with these ghosts, because the Scoleri brothers are played by people, no less. There are actors under all of that, so there is puppet aspects of this, but also these ghosts are
the people. Scoleri brothers specifically are people in makeup.
In a lot of it, yeah.
Wow.
It's I'm on the page. I don't just know this, folks, but it's Tim Lawrence plays Nunzio Scoleri and Jim Fye plays Tony Scoleri. Which one's which? Couldn't tell you. But I'm guessing it looks like Nunzio is probably the bigger one. But so
that's
there's
incredible.
So obviously I imagine there's a puppet aspect of it where they kind of create these, but when they've got the close-ups and you're looking at the faces, it's people. And I I assume the reason he knows it's the Scoleri brothers is because it's two of them. One's big, one's small, and they're in the electric chairs. I don't imagine that's checking a lot of boxes on who else it could be.
Sure.
I love that they show up. It's kind of dark, but like when they first appear, because the way I love his rant when he's yelling at them that leads to the Scoleri brothers jumping out, where he is just like berating these men for what they've done. He thinks they're hucksters. He thinks they're just literally, he just goes on. And he literally, I think I've pulled up his like final rant here, and he's like, if my hands weren't tied by the unalterable fetters of the law, then I would invoke the tradition of our illustrious forebears, reach back to a purer, sterner justice, and have you burned at the stake. And I'm just like, this is so needlessly specific. Like, my God, man. Like, and part of that is, I guess, the idea that the mood slime may be like forcing it out of him, that it's making him be more negative. But then that leads to,
is the slime a two-way street? Is the slime making people angry, and their anger is fueling the slime?
Yeah, basically, it's a vicious circle. Like,
it seems like his speech is activating the slime, but also it seems like the slime
egging him
is
on. Yeah.
It seems to go both ways.
It does go both. That's my understanding of it, at least, is that the slime brings out the negativity, and as the negativity ramps up, the slime becomes more immense, so much so that it floods a pneumatic transit system, which I'm told was intended to be a real thing. I don't know. But anyway, I love that whole rant. It leads to the Scoleri brothers, so the slime just explodes. And the Scoleri brothers appear, and I love that they appear in the electric chairs. Like, it's like they appear, it's like, I don't know if it was a time jump that they just immediately appeared as ghosts in 1989 after whenever they died in the 50s or the 60s, but, or whenever it was. But the look of these guys is so cool. They've got the electricity kind of cracking around them. Their eyes are like lit up like light bulbs. It's just, the work was put in to make these guys look very, very distinctive, and it works.
Andrew, this is an excellent pick. I'm going to go somewhere else, but I don't know. There's a lot of scenes I liked in this movie. We're going to talk about a lot of them. I'm going to jump really to our final act. In our big set piece, I really like the Ghostbusters riding inside the Statue of Liberty. Yep. And I know from like reading about the reactions that this is, I guess I don't know how the fandom feels about it, but whenever they talk about this movie being a retread of the first one, this is seen as replicating the Stay Puft guy from the first one.
Yep.
I don't really see it that way, but it's a big thing going through the city. I get it. But them specifically riding inside of it, I think is so much fun. I think it looks great. I mean, I can see how it's done. Like, obviously the close-ups of them in the crown are like a set, and then farther away, there's times when it's a woman painted in green, and a lot of different effects,
like a model of the city, stuff like that. But that's how it used to be, man, and it looks good.
It looks great. It comes together great, and they just it's just fun. I'm just having a blast. Like, there's some Vinkman fires off some of his best jokes. He's like, don't you have any questions? Like, whether or not she's naked under that toga? She's French. You know that.
You know that, right?
And this one killed me. He's basically like in the background of the scene, and he's playing on the microphone that they're going to use to announce. And he goes, "How many of you here are National Monument? Raise your hand." "Oh, hello, ma'am." Because she's,
hello, miss.
Of course, raising her hand because it's the Statue of Liberty. So good. Yeah, just again, the visual of them, the crown, her walking through the bay is so cool. Like, it comes up to like almost her chin, and then walking through the city to get to the museum where Vigo is, crashing through the ceiling. It's awesome. It's such a cool special effect. It's
like, you talk about superhero moments and superhero landings. It's just so cool. Like and this is great. And you know, like you said, you can say that this is where we're at our most cartoony, but it's still fun, and I don't really care. Like, you get the statue. Well, here's the question, Chris: is the Statue of Liberty now classified as a mech?
Oh, what?
Because the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is clearly a kaiju. Like, he's clearly a giant
Yes.
monster. Like, so the Statue of Liberty is definitely a mech.
I don't know though. I think they're not controlling her.
Yes, they are. They have a controller.
Okay,
They show it.
You're right. You're right. I'm just thinking like she's not like full of gears and stuff. Is kind of what I meant. But yeah, I can't find any holes in this logic whatsoever.
You heard it here, folks. Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is a kaiju. Statue of Liberty is a mech. There we go.
There's got to be a comic book where these two fight. They find a way to fit them.
There better be. It's a waste of time otherwise. But anyway, I love this scene. I love the build up to this scene too, because what has happened at this point is the Museum of Natural Art, which is not actually the Museum of Natural Art. It is. I actually saw what building it was. It says here it was the Alexander Hamilton U.S. Custom House that they use as the exterior of the museum. It has like the lions and stuff outside of it, which I guess they thought was a much more striking appearance. But this whole museum is basically encased in the negative slime, and the Ghostbusters show up and they try to shoot their proton packs at it, and it doesn't do anything. And so they realize that at this point they need a tremendous amount of positive energy to counteract this negative mood slime, and they just don't have it. So they're like, what in the world can we use to get everybody like rooting for us to do this? And they see a license plate and they see the Statue of Liberty, and they're like, that might be it. And there's an optimism about us being able to unite behind a symbol that is always going to land for me. Just this idea that just maybe there is that one thing that we can all look at and be like, you know what? Okay, that's the thing.
I was reminded of the end of Spider-Man, where New York bands together. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And like, it's cheesy and corny, and I've never lived in New York. I don't know how much that is wishful thinking.
This was 10 years before that, so it's the idea of New York uniting is not. It works, and so they go to the Statue of Liberty. You're talking about Amazing Spider-Man, right?
No. Spider-Man. It's Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, 2002.
13 years.
Okay, I was like, you're breaking my brain. It's still 13. I feel like it's like 20, but it's way before that.
So the triumph of humanity is always going to be a story that I like. Don't let my real world cynicism believe that I don't. But I love that they do this. I love that they use the Statue of Liberty for it. I love that it's this symbol that they're able to use for this. And when they show up, it messes up the whole thing. And that moment right before they smash the Statue of Liberty into the window, and like that whole buildup of just like everybody's on their side. They don't need anything else at that point, and they're able to do exactly what they need to do. And they get inside, and I love it. It is a great moment, and it leads to our finale, which we can talk about now, we can talk about later, but in that moment, I can't disagree with you. This sequence is great. It gets really funny. Like, I love the part where they're marching it through, and they're like, can't she go any faster? And he's like, the vibrations might shake her to pieces. We should have padded her feet. And then Egon's like, I don't think they make Nikes in her size, Ray. Just fun lines like that, where they're clearly still having a blast. And yeah, we also get introduced to the newest piece of Ghostbusters tech in this movie, the slime blower, which is just a giant thing that shoots positive slime instead of negative slime.
Was that a toy, Andrew? Is that a prop?
I didn't have one. It seemed very difficult to make. And even now, fans are still like, you want to make a slime blower, dude? It's a lot of work. The 3D printing has helped out Ghostbuster fans a lot as far as making props, because 3D print anything you want. And I have a friend, my friend Keith, actually 3D printed a whole proton pack. Keith, share that in the Discord, please. He worked very hard on it. It looks very, very cool. He implemented some of the new stuff from Frozen Empire, but 3D printers really also made ghostbusting props a lot easier, because you could just print the whole thing. But there are people who 3D print like those slime blowers, and I'm like, these things are massive. How in God's name do you do that? Like, and you just print it in pieces, and you put them together, and you assemble it, and you Bondo around the seams and everything. But it is wild. But those are the things, and I don't know the mixture of the slime. There's some interview with Dan Aykroyd where he's talking about how the consistency of the slime and what they used for it, and I'm just like, I'm sure Chris, imagine the smell. It
reminds me of like Gak.
Gak
in the 90s.
Yeah, there's a throwback.
Yeah, we can talk about finale. Why not? We can bounce around. We're there. She crashes through. They face off with Vigo, who we haven't mentioned yet, but voiced by alum of the show, Mark Strong Award winner Max Van Sandow.
Max von Sydow. Jesus, man. You've
Max
massacred that.
Von Segal. Did I say it right? What did I say it wrong?
Oh, Jesus.
Max Von Shadow. That's what I said.
Rest in peace to this man who Chris can't pronounce his name.
Maximus von. Okay, Max von Sydow. Am I say it right?
Yes, Sydow. Yes,
Sydow. Wonderful voice, great pick. It's I don't know. You gotta shout it out. Gotta mention it.
Yeah, we somehow never talked about Vigo at all in any of this, which is kind of a mistake. Not a cast or anything.
Like the presence is there, but it's not really a character till the very, very end. You know, it's mostly
he definitely talks throughout the movie. I mean, he's not like physically present, but he is speaking. It is Wilhelm von Homburg who plays Vigo. It's actually very funny. He was one of the henchmen in Die Hard. That's probably what everybody knows him for. I'm trying to remember which one he was, because he's not one of the big ones, I don't think.
Is he the one with long blonde hair?
No.
Oh,
he's the one with long brown hair, maybe? I don't remember. He's not Carl. Carl is the one you're thinking of. He's not Carl.
Okay.
Carl is the long blonde hair. So he's in Die Hard. I think he's the one with the ponytail. He's the one that looks like Vigo.
Yeah. Okay, got
it. There you go, Andrew. Nailed it. Anyway, there is a clip that exists of like raw studio footage of him as Vigo speaking, and it's like the most earth-shattering thing in the world because his voice doesn't sound imposing at all. It doesn't sound at all menacing. Now, what I will say sucks is Wilhelm potentially apparently was not told that he was getting dubbed until he saw it. And that's not cool.
Yeah.
Like there's no nice way to have that conversation. I get that, but like,
well, unless it was a decision. Well, okay, he still should have known before he saw it. Like,
right.
I wonder when they were filming it, did they think it would be his voice, or did they know all along and not tell him?
I think they didn't necessarily know it wasn't going to be his voice when they started. It seems like an odd thing to not
this
know.
This isn't working.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. But anyway, Wilhelm von Homburg is the physical body of Vigo. Max von Sydow is his voice. Von Sydow obviously got a little bit of that, Chris, what do you call that?
Gravitas. I was debating doing a Giannis impression, but like I ran through it like twice on my head. I think I would butcher this. So
can't do it. Anyway, yeah, Max von Sydow is it's an imposing voice now. It is definitely, you know, the kind of scenery chewing that Vigo is doing and the endless monologuing that he does. Von Sydow's voice works for that. So yeah, interesting choice. Are we talking about the finale? Is that what we're doing? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I mean, he paralyzes the Ghostbusters, and then they manage to, what do? The
positive energy of the city. The city is basically, this is New Year's Eve, by the way. So this is like building up, and so a crowd has shown up outside the museum because I guess when you see a giant slime shell around a building, you get a little curious, even on New Year's Eve. So everybody's there. The Ghostbusters are kind of pinned down, and he's going for Oscar. So the hook of this movie, as we may have established at some point, is that Vigo is this spectral entity stuck in this tied to this painting, who wants a human body that he can basically inhabit. And Oscar is what he is. Why Oscar? Why New Year's 1989? Never explained. Doesn't matter. Don't think about it too hard. But so the Ghostbusters are incapacitated. Dana is tied up, and so Vigo has Oscar, and he's about to like merge with him or whatever he's going to do. And the crowd outside is singing Auld Lang Syne and just kind of being that. And the positive, the good vibes of the crowd are enough to basically trip up Vigo and stop him. They incapacitate him long enough that it forces him back into the painting, and that's when they're able to use That's the moment where Ray gets inhabited by Vigo briefly, but then they're able to use the slime and the things to send him back into the painting again, and that's when they're able to destroy the painting, and it turns into a weird drawing of the Ghostbusters somehow.
That was weird. That explanation reminds me of this great scene from Donnie Darko where he's explaining Smurfs lore because his friends get it wrong. And he's like, first off, Papa Smurf didn't make Smurfette. Gargamel did as his evil spy, but the overwhelming goodness of the Smurfs transformed her. And that's exactly what's happening here. Just the overwhelming positivity of this crowd defeats the villain, which, honestly, wonderful. I understand this not working maybe at the time, but, like, I love this. I love how... You said it earlier. I mean, I'm always going to root for a story that's about positivity and goodness, like overcoming, especially as time goes on and things get seemingly more bleak. It's nice to go back to.
Yep. I like this ending a lot. I do like Lewis's part that he plays here, which doesn't feel like it accomplishes much, but there's a scene that I mentioned earlier that he gets one of the best lines. So at a certain point, everything goes to hell, and the Ghostbusters are all going to the museum trying to figure out what's going on. Dana's gone to the museum. They're all there. So Lewis and Janine are like, what can we do? So Lewis suits up. This is what happens. Lewis suits up, wears full Ghostbuster gear, puts on the proton pack. Janine's clearly enjoying the sight. I don't know how to put that more tactfully. But he goes running out to help and doesn't have a car, I guess. So he's running down the street. And I will always remember this, where he literally is like, stay fit, keep sharp, make good decisions. And then he runs up to a bus stop, and the bus pulls up, and the doors open, and Slimer's driving the bus. And he immediately is like, okay, I hope you have your license.
You've talked about that bit specifically before. You've talked about it on mic before. I cannot remember why you brought it up. Probably just because Ghostbusters is always on your brain. But yeah, he sees that it's a ghost, and he's like, all right. Like, he acknowledges it.
Hope you got your license.
That is a fantastic... Is it a subtle joke? It seems the opposite of subtle, but also in a way that I don't think everyone picks up on.
A subtle joke, and it's like he immediately violates what he just said.
Yeah, like, I don't know if people...
I think that's just kind of the joke of Lewis. It was funny when Ghostbusters 16 was ramping up. I remember when people were really upset. One of the big criticisms was that all the men in Ghostbusters 16 are either evil or stupid. And I was like, well, buddy, you need to go watch some movies in the 80s and see how they treated women. But it's... one of the things there's two things that I will never forget. One is I said Venkman's a creep in the first Ghostbusters, and I got railed. Like, people were not happy I said that, even though it's objectively true. The other thing I pointed out was that Lewis, as a character, is an idiot, and he's played for laughs. And they were trying to argue that Lewis's foibles are not meant to be laughed at. And I was like, no, Lewis is absolutely meant to be laughed at. Like, that's the point of his character. He is a comedic relief. Like, I mean, it's a comedy, but, like, he's clearly meant to be, like, laughed at. Like, clearly. He keeps locking himself out of his apartment. Like, how am I not supposed to find that funny? He's never learning from his lesson. So again, I think you are meant to laugh at it, and you are supposed to notice, because that's Lewis's character, essentially.
Don't want to rehash this. We have an episode about Ghostbusters 2016, but I do remember the criticism that Chris Hemsworth's character is too dumb, and I'm like, guys, enjoy things, people. What do you do?
It's a different kind of comedy.
Any other movie, would you be gauging how dumb a character is, or are you looking for something?
Ghostbusters is supposed to be cool, smart, dry, sardonic humor, and this is all slapsticky, just like that cartoon I watched as a kid and loved, but now apparently the movies can't be like that. Anyway, we're moving on. Lewis is very funny. And I love that scene where he gets on the bus. I just think it's very, very funny. I love that also, like, Janine and Lewis are hanging around the apartment after Venkman gets arrested. Dana clearly doesn't want them there, but they're like, oh no, it's no problem. We'll hang out. Doesn't matter. Like, she's just like, for the love of God, leave this place.
A lot of my notes are just, quotes, but a lot of my favorite Egon quotes. I mentioned we're talking about characters, his ability to use nerd talk with intention and to to hold his own. Epitomized in this line where Venkman is, of course, giving him a hard time. He asks him if the ladies love his large cranium. It basically, how smart he is, calling him a nerd, essentially. And his comeback is, I think they're more interested in my epididymis. And he says that not because he's a poorly written nerd character that uses big words for no reason, but because he knows Venkman will not know what that means. And I love Venkman's blank stare as he's trying to come up with a comeback, but he doesn't even understand what was just said to him. And Egon gets the last laugh there. Again, these are some of the nuances with this character that I love and have endeared me to him. I, of course, did not know what epididymis was and had to Google it. I now know. If you're curious, you can do the same thing and Google it. There's I think later, in the same scene, there's
You all can figure it out. I believe in you without Googling it.
You can figure it out without Googling it, Andrew?
I'm sure you can figure out, based off of the context and everything, what Egon means.
Sure. What may be part of the body we're talking about, sure. I think it's later in the same scene where we just get some more good Egon stuff where, God, who asks him about the Slinky? I only wrote down Egon stuff.
It's Ray.
Right.
They're walking around the room and there's toys and Ray picks up a stuffed Triceratops, which maybe Ray is my favorite Ghostbuster because he likes dinosaurs. But it's but at one point he's just Egon says it earlier. He's my parents didn't believe in toys.
Yeah.
And Ray's holding up the dinosaur and he's like, you didn't even have a Slinky?
Yeah, and Egon says we had part of a Slinky, let me just stop right there. Hilarious. How do you have part of a Slinky? His parents are so against toys, he's only allowed part of a Slinky. But then he continues, but I straightened it. It says so much about Egon.
Ridiculous thing to do. An objectively ridiculous thing to even say, let alone
it's
do.
Just him as a kid was more interested in quote unquote fixing a piece of metal than playing with it. It's such a funny joke, insight into the character. It's doing a lot of work. It's great. I love this guy.
It's so good. This whole scene, they're there. Even Venkman's getting in on the fun. Just, talking to Oscar and all those different pieces of it. This is a really good scene. Just again, showing the chemistry of the cast, things like that. This is where we get a little bit of history of what happened to Peter and Dana after the first movie, where basically they kind of broke up. She kind of got together potentially with the musician from the first movie. It's kind of unclear if it's meant to be the same guy or not. But ultimately he ends up leaving her and going to Europe. So that allows Venkman to kind of re-enter the proceedings. So you get a lot of information, but you get a lot of really good banter. Ray and Egon are always really fun characters when they're talking. There's a scene in the first movie where Dana's describing her problem in the first movie, and they're sitting there and they just start going back and forth talking about all the different supernatural literature they're going to look at while they're chomping on Cheez-Its. And I'm I am these characters because I also chomp on Cheez-Its. But it's just fun. They're just, anytime those characters are going back and forth, you can tell. And it helps that Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis write these characters. So I do love that about Egon, though, is that he's clearly the smartest, nerdiest of them. But Venkman never phases him.
Yeah.
Egon does not Venkman will say something really condescending, and Egon either just has the best comeback or just doesn't care. Because in the first one, Venkman, the first movie, he's Egon, I'm going to take back some of the things I said about you. And he pulls out a candy bar and he's you've earned it, and hands him this candy bar. And Egon's you can see that Egon's face will be screw you, man, free candy bar. He doesn't care that Venkman is condescending to him. He's whatever. And so, and ultimately Egon knows, he's I'm the brains of this operation. You can say whatever you want. It only works because I'm here. So, it's always funny though to just see Venkman try to get into under Egon's skin, and he just stonewalls him. That's the wall, brother. But doesn't work at all.
Man, Venkman, his TV show
Oh God.
What's the name of the show? I'm sure
World of the Psychic. World of the Psychic.
Where it's clearly just Vinkman bringing on quacks to make fun of them to their face without them knowing about it. That's like seems to be the whole bit. I wished we had even more of this, but we get a lot of it. It is so funny, and the line deliveries are just pitch perfect. I love whenever the one psychic he has on, she says the day that the world's gonna end. I don't remember the year, but she says it's February 14th. And he just looks down the barrel of the camera and says, Valentine's Day. Bummer.
Yeah.
It's so good. And then he wraps up the show where like a stagehand hands him a hairless chihuahua. Next week, though, hairless pets. Weird. that's the tease for next week.
I do want to shout out. It is Kevin Dunn. It is Kevin Dunn and Chloe Webb who play the people on the show. I think Chloe Webb says it's going to be Valentine's Day, either 2016 or 2060. But then it's Kevin Dunn's character. I love, because this is like, he calls it. He basically says the end of the world is going to be at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. Because as we come to find out, that is when Vigo's plan starts. Like, his plan is to inhabit that, which would lead to the end of the world. So it's kind of funny that the irony is that the show is about quacks, but this guy calls it. And the only reason it doesn't happen is because the Ghostbusters stop it. But that bit has always been a little bit clever writing there. Like, you clearly set up the show to be a bunch of quacks and not take it seriously. And then throughout the course of the movie, you're like, oh, one of them actually sort of did know what he was talking about. And
Vinkman's whole thing with him is that the timeline is so short, he's not going to make any money off of his book.
He can't capitalize off this enough. It's like, well, you're not going to see paperbacks for at least a year. It's going to be another year before you know if you've got that big miniseries. And he's like, the guy says, he's like, this is not some scam. He's like, I have a strong psychic feeling that the world is going to end at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. And he's like, well, for your sake, I hope you're right. Like, it literally says to him. This is also where we got our first bit of Hardmeyer and the mayor. The mayor is David Margulies, who returns from the first film. He plays the mayor there as well. But I love the line they say to the mayor when they're trying to explain to him what's happening while they're standing there in pajamas, basically. They're like, this is later in the film, but they're like, well, Mayor, I'd like to say that almost 50% of us voted for you in the last election. Which, in a group of 4, means one of them did. So I've always, like, my favorite version of that is, like, anytime it's a group of, like, a small group that I was like, almost 50% of us. That is another one that I have shamelessly. It's like it's a group of 3, almost 50% of us. Or a group of 3, I think the funnier thing would be, like, almost a quarter of us, which would mean 0 of you did it. But I
Andrew,
love that.
If a madman mugged you on the street, held a gun to your head, and said, I'm going to pull the trigger unless you can tell me the atomic weight of cobalt, would you know the answer?
58.9?
You nailed it. That's it.
There it is.
Wow.
Folks, I want to stress, I did not look that up. I
was looking at Andrew. He was
that
like,
was not pre-prepped. That was not anything. That is... So, folks, I'm still alive. Good to go.
If that obscure situation happens, that was Egon's version of, does the Pope wear a funny hat or bear crap in the woods?
Yeah.
Is the atomic weight of cobalt 58.9, which
I like the look Ray gives him, because the look Ray gives him also suggests that Ray is aware that is the correct answer. I love it. Egon is a great character. Yeah, it's fantastic. I could talk about this movie for a long time. It is very, very fun.
We'll wrap up soon here. I want to know, what is the general feeling, or what's your feeling on the darker jumpsuits they wear briefly in this movie? It's the jumpsuits they have on most of the posters. It seems like they're doing that thing that superhero movies do, where you iterate the costume every time so you can sell more toys, which probably is what it is, but ultimately, they barely wear them in the movie. There's like a montage where they're wearing Santa hats and wearing them.
Yeah.
But how do we feel with these darker jumpsuits?
I always thought they were cool, but it very much comes off like, I don't know if you saw any of the marketing for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, but there was this big craze because they saw in some of the trailers they were wearing these red parkas, these like red winter coats.
Yeah.
Because the city freezes over. It's a very similar vibe. Those coats are barely seen in that movie. To the point that like there's a scene in the trailer where they're standing on the roof wearing them. It's not in the movie. I think the only character who wears one is Lucky, one of the characters that comes back from the afterlife. They're just not in it. So it was kind of a similar thing where it felt like we were kind of like the new hip Ghostbusters, and yeah, they're just not there. Now the fan reaction to them is pretty cool. People thought having like a darker colored jumpsuit was really, really cool. Now one of the things that Frozen Empire does introduce is the engineering group, because they introduced like a Ghostbusters like research and development lab. And one of the characters there is played by James Acaster, who's one of my favorite British comedians. He shows up as a character kind of sitting in that Egon knowledge area. He's got a really great line in Frozen Empire where he's listening, trying to do some readings on the containment unit. And Paul Rudd's like, "Oh, does that machine help you listen for ghosts?" And he's like, "No, what helps me listen for ghosts is silence." And just much great deadpan deliveries like that he's really good at. But he wears a black jumpsuit, just full on a black jumpsuit that has like a different logo on it. So they've been introducing some variants, which the fans jump all over stuff like that. They love it. They love being able to add different.
If you're at a con and you're wearing the darker flight suit, you've got some cool points. Like,
yeah, I mean, people are going to know what it means, and yeah, because actually finding black jumpsuits is easy, finding the tan jumpsuits is easy. These gray ones are actually you can't really buy them stock anywhere. Like the beige ones, you can go to an army surplus and they'll have them. They have them. And I don't know if it's because they know about the Ghostbusters fans or what. Black jumpsuits are relatively easy to find as well. There are like specialty cosplay sites that will make you a gray jumpsuit or a navy. People will use navy ones to kind of stand in for these sometimes. They'll buy like a dark blue, even though these are clearly gray. Or maybe they're not. I don't know. Maybe my eyes are terrible. I don't know. But I've always assumed they were gray. But so people would have to like kind of figure out ways to make their own gray ones before people started kind of producing them. But Ghostbusters fans are like, the video game introduced a bunch of mods to the proton packs. People started making those. Frozen Empire introduces some like revamped newer proton packs that have these like yellow accents in various ways, and people jumped all over those immediately. People love that about this franchise. They will never be sad at having more options for suits, for gear, for whatever.
All right, a few more questions, Andrew.
Sure.
Is Ghostbusters 2 a Christmas movie?
No. It's a New Year's movie.
Okay. Is Cheech Marin a cameo or a bit part?
It's a cameo.
Okay.
Also featuring our ghost ship. I know I mentioned that last week, that Ghostbusters 2 has a ghost ship. It has an actual ghost ship.
Yes, a proper ghost ship. Not just any ghost ship, Titanic.
Not just a ship full of ghosts, which would have been the proper title for ghost ship, but an actual genuine ghost ship also full of ghosts. Yes, and like I said, not just any ship. I didn't want to spoil it at the time. I love that bit so much. He's like, there's some dock supervisor down at Pier 34. What's the problem? He says the Titanic just arrived. Like, and it's full on. Cuts to Cheech Marin. I don't even know if it's a cameo. Like, it's 89, so like people
That's
knew
what
Cheech and Chong
Cheech
were.
and Chong is established. They've got movies. They're a big comedy act, but I don't know how much is crossover into like mainstream or proper supporting acting roles is. So I feel like people know who he is by this time. I don't know.
I love his line. I love when they're both just looking at each other and they're like, and he's like, well, better late than never. Yeah. And then he does get the line later when he does get the bit later. They're walking the Statue of Liberty towards the harbor, and it cuts back to him, and he's just like got his eyes wide, and he's like, what? Like, what is happening? But yes, I would say, I don't know, cameo, I guess. Like, it's not, he has one line, doesn't say anything, and I would assume people knew who Cheech and Chong were.
I will say about this movie, now that I've finally seen it, and I knew a lot of the criticisms going into it. I don't necessarily disagree. I understand the criticism that it's the first movie again with slight changes, like it's hitting the same notes beat for beat. I think that's a little exaggerated. I think like Austin Powers 2 is the first movie again. Like it is literally repeating jokes. Like the joke is that it's the same joke, but it's literally repeating jokes. Like the montage where just before they say the word you think they're going to say, it cuts to the next scene. Like that to me feels much more like we're doing the first one again than Ghostbusters 2. But I do understand the comparisons. It just wasn't as blatant or as off-putting as I thought it was going to be after hearing so many things. I think, again, from an outsider's perspective, I think this movie does something very important because Ghostbusters is, as a franchise, is like a phenomenon. It's like every kid from the 80s to the 90s to maybe even now knows the Ghostbusters. They know that symbol. It's just part of pop culture. I knew elements of this movie without ever having seen it just because it's such a big part of pop culture. And something I've said on mic before is I don't know why Men in Black didn't become a Ghostbusters for a new generation. I love that first movie so much. I love that world. There's obviously a lot of parallels. They both have a theme song. They both have like a costume, a look. Like, there's so many great parallels that I feel like Men in Black could have become a Ghostbusters-like franchise. But I think a major reason it does not is because the second Men in Black movie, we covered it on our podcast. It is not the success necessary to turn the movie to a franchise. Whereas Ghostbusters has Ghostbusters 2 that, even though it has its complaints and critics, is successful enough to move this to a full-on franchise. That it's not just Ghostbusters 2. You mentioned the animated series. That's a huge part of it. The marketing is a huge part of it. The Slimer Ecto Cooler, like, it has a whole, like, marketing train behind it that leads to, lunch boxes and stuff. That leads to it becoming such a big part of pop culture. But certainly the two live-action films are the tent poles of that, which Men in Black, it just doesn't have that follow-up to permeate into pop culture in a long-standing way that Ghostbusters does. So in that regard, I think this second movie is so important to what this franchise becomes. Even if you've got your complaints about the quality or what have you, I had a great time. I loved this movie a lot. And
I think you go ahead, continue.
No, I just that's it. I enjoyed watching it. I'm not gonna sit here and try to act like I'm suddenly an expert that can tell you it's just as high of quality as the first one. I haven't seen these movies very many times. I've only seen the second one once, but I had a great time with it.
The things that I will say about Ghostbusters 2 is that, one, I would say that multiple things can be true at once. I think the movie can largely be a rehash of the first movie and still be fun to watch. You can do that. It can be a movie that plays the same story beats and still be fun to watch, and I think this movie fits into that category. There's something, again, about seeing them back as the characters, seeing them being in the world again, for lack of a better way to put it. There are definitely other sequels that are really just another adventure with these characters in that world, and sometimes that's all people wanted. They don't need it necessarily to evolve. Not that evolving is necessarily a bad thing or inherently a good thing, but so you can have a movie that's broadly following the same story beats. It's a new villain, sure, but you've got the same ideas, and it can still be fun to watch. The thing that I will say that I really like about Ghostbusters 2, and this is one of the slight criticisms I have more so to Afterlife than I do with Frozen Empire, but Frozen Empire treats the Ghostbusters as this almost mythical thing. Like, the Ghostbusters are these, like, almost deified characters. They're this like, there's this weight, this legacy given to the Ghostbusters. And in turn, you're watching a movie that is giving that weight to the film Ghostbusters. It is Jason Reitman making Ghostbusters Afterlife instead of his father. It is his love letter to Ghostbusters. And I think this is kind of where you can go wrong with the idea of legacy sequels. If what you're doing is so entrenched and so beholden to that first movie, it can lack its own identity. Now, obviously, it's a Ghostbusters movie. There's going to be crossovers. But a lot of Ghostbusters Afterlife is spent kind of telling you, hey, Ghostbusters was pretty cool, wasn't it? And I was like, well, yeah. That's why I wanted to watch another one. Ghostbusters 2 is not burdened by any of that. It's actually very interesting looking back, kind of, especially when you look at what like franchises and like, especially like long gestating sequels have become now. Like even Top Gun Maverick, I think works largely, but Tom Cruise's character is given this almost like heavy weight of like, oh man, that's Maverick. Like that, you don't understand how big of a deal that guy is. But whereas Ghostbusters 2 really is just like, here's another adventure with these characters. Now, Frozen Empire, I think, plays much more in that sandbox. Like the original characters are there, but there's not this like, the weight of the original Ghostbusters is not a driving force of the plot like it kind of is in Ghostbusters Afterlife. So in that regard, I do like that about Ghostbusters 2, where it's just been, you think about it, it was 5 years after the first one, but it's not really feeling the need to be like, hey guys, Ghostbusters was pretty cool. It's
they make it a point to start with that birthday party and show that they are not respected. They didn't become celebrities. And part of me watching it, because after the courtroom scene, they are back on top. And part of me watching it was like, why didn't we just start here? But I think this is the reason that you start with them dejected and almost out of business, is to keep the characters humble and I want to say the same in a negative way, but as much as we talk about the tone changing and the edges being rubbed off and them being a little more sanitized, this still keeps them closer to where they were in that first movie by having them not have big heads and again be admired by the entire world at the beginning.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really interesting choice. Now, I will say, Ghostbusters Afterlife also kind of does the same thing, where the movie starts with like, ghosts aren't real, and then it turns out ghosts are real, and we're all like, ah! It's like, okay, you don't need to do that every time there's a new Ghostbusters movie. Which, to be fair, again, Frozen Empire does not. Frozen Empire starts with them busting a ghost, and it's pretty cool. But I like Ghostbusters 2. It's really fun to watch. It's not difficult to watch. And so, like I said, the way I kind of view it is that multiple things can be true. It can be a rehash. It can largely be like a rehash of the first movie, flaws and all. And it can still be a really fun movie because it doesn't necessarily need to move on to anything else. It can just be another Ghostbusters adventure, and they find ways to work in new stuff. And like you said, just being back in the world, being with the characters, and especially given that for the longest time, this is where it ended for these characters. Like we got a cartoon in the late 90s called Extreme Ghostbusters, because of course it was called Extreme Ghostbusters. Yeah. We got the video game in 2009, which was, for a lot of people, that was Ghostbusters 3. It was all the original characters, all the original actors coming back to voice and provide their likeness to the characters. It was a story written by Dan and Harold, although that's apparently kind of a misnomer. Apparently they came up with like a general plot outline that the studio then turned into the actual game. But it really, so for a lot of people, there's just not a lot of stuff with these characters. Like even the cartoons are like, it's not these guys. And so for a lot of people that have just wanted to see these guys back as the characters, every chance you got to see them became something to enjoy and something to treasure. And Afterlife, they're literally only in Afterlife for like minutes. They're not in it a lot. They show up as the Ghostbusters in the last like 5-10 minutes. And then in Frozen Empire, they do feature a lot more. And so for those fans that have just wanted to see these characters desperately back for a really long time, I will gladly support them in enjoying every moment they get to watch them as they were. And I'm not going to pretend this movie's not fun. It's a blast. It's fun to watch. It's got some cool stuff, great designs. Is it the first movie? No, but I don't think anybody was expecting it to be.
And that's a wrap on Ghost Month, Andrew. This was a fun category to dive into. We got a little bit of variety out of this one. during our spooky season. But
I ain't even gonna lie to you, dude. The whole premise of this month was just to get to do Ghostbusters 2. No delusions whatsoever in admitting that.
I mean, Ghostbusters 2 has been on our list for a while, but we've been considering different ways to work it in. But this worked out. We had a lot of fun along the way. A lot of movies I'm glad I either saw for the first time, like this one, or got to revisit, like 13 Ghosts. Good time. But with it being the end of a month, that of course means it's about to be the beginning of another month, which also means a new theme. November on Best of the Rest is Star Wars prequel month. We've talked some Star Wars before. We covered Rise of Skywalker on our podcast, but we're devoting an entire month to the franchise, of course, specifically about those prequel movies, which were, Andrew, poorly received upon release. Both.
What?
The entire trilogy, despite what some people might tell you today. We'll dive into it as we go through the movies, but we are talking episodes 1, 2, and 3, and Solo, a Star Wars movie, or Star Wars story, I think that's called.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never seen it. I'll be watching it for the first time. But of course, that is a prequel. Takes place before the events of that original trilogy. Andrew, Star Wars, I haven't watched any Star Wars since probably our episode on Rise of Skywalker. I haven't kept up with the shows. Star Wars is a franchise I kind of hop in and out of every few years. The prequels specifically, I have not watched in a long time. This is going to be a heck of a trip. You ready to do this?
Yeah, sure.
Enthused as ever. We're going to have a very special guest on next week for episode 1 to help us break it down. So be sure you come back for that. And, this is plugs and stuff here. Go to Apple Podcast, leave a review for our podcast. I don't think I've asked people to do that in a while, but if you have yet to leave us a positive review, come on. What are you waiting for? Help us out. I'll read it on a future episode. So whatever words you want coming out of my mouth, this is how you can make that happen. Of course, hop into our Discord server. That's where the party is. That's where the action is. That's how you can be a part of our community and talk about all kinds of nerdy stuff. There's a link to that server in the show notes, so be sure you click on that. Star Wars month. Next month in a galaxy.
Something about the way you said making words come out of your mouth sounded deeply unsettling to me. Or putting words into coming out of your mouth. I don't know what it is. The way you said it was just, I didn't like it at all. I just want you to know that.
Your words, my mouth. Is that better?
Why would that be better?
Your words can come out of my mouth. Leave us a review on Apple Podcast.
Oh, we're doing the low voices now. We're doing the low voices now. Oh, I understand.
Best of the Rest will return next month for
We're up to hole
Star
18
Wars.
Now. He is 3 under par, but you got to wonder if he's going to have the wherewithal to pull this off, folks. I don't
Star Wars
golf,
month.
So I don't know what any of these
next month. Until then, just remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides. No, I can't do it. Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. You can follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That's the only way that we grow. Follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
But
I was
we'll
surprised going into this movie how Lois and Dana don't feel forced. Did I say Lois?
You did. I was like, who's Lois?
How? Let me take that again.